So for those of you who I haven't had the chance to meet, my name is Dina Zuckerberg. I am the Director of Family Programs at MyFace and the host of the MyFace My Story podcast. I was also born with a cleft lip, hearing loss, and no vision in one eye. So I understand firsthand what it means to navigate school while looking and experiencing the world differently. This topic is incredibly important to me because school is where our children spend so much of their time, not just learning academically, but developing their sense of identity, confidence, and belonging. I know from my own experience and from working closely with so many families in the community how critical it is to ensure that our children are supported, included, and empowered to succeed. Advocacy can feel overwhelming at times, but it can also be one of the most powerful tools we have as parents and caregivers. Tonight, we are honored to be joined by three incredible panelists: Liliana Diaz-Pedrosa, Suzanne Orlando, and Alyssa Avila, who bring their professional expertise, clinical insight, lived experience, and most importantly, their wisdom to you. I'm truly grateful to have each of you here tonight. And thank you all for being here. Please continue to share your questions in the Q&A throughout the discussion, and we will make sure to address them. Our first speaker tonight is Liliana Diaz-Pedrosa. Liliana is an attorney at Advocates for Children of New York, where she supervises the Parent Center Project, providing information, guidance, and legal representation to families on education-related matters. She has conducted hundreds of workshops on education law and is deeply committed to helping families understand their rights and advocate effectively for their children. And now I will turn it over to Liliana. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Dina. And hello, everybody. I'm going to try to share my screen. And one sec. Now I'm going to try to get the slideshow from beginning. Let me know, please, if you are seeing a slide that says My Face IDEA 504 and bullying. You get thumbs up?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. All right. So as Dina said, my name is Liliana Diaz-Pedrosa. I'm an attorney at Advocates for Children of New York. We're a New York City-based center, parent center, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. Today, my role is to just give you a very quick overview, and I mean fast, about the IDEA, Section 504, and a little bit about bullying, just so that we have a standard and a baseline for some of the discussion today, okay? If that works for everyone, of course, I'm available to answer questions. I have tried to include information that is national, and where I have doubts about that, I will tell you, okay? All right, let me see if I can move the screen to the next slide. There we go. So Advocates for Children of New York is an independent agency that protects the rights of all New York City students. If you're in New York City, you can contact us through our helpline Monday through Thursday, 10 to 4. We have a ton of guides and resources, some of which are applicable to national, other states and territories. And we do a ton of workshops and trainings. So if you're looking for information and you're wondering where to find it, you can come find us. We will send you to the right place if you are not in the correct place as well. And all our services are free. So there's really nothing that you can lose if you really need something, some questions answered, some guidance, some information. But there's also a national network of parent training and information centers. So every single state and territory has at least one parent training information center or community parent and resource centers. And you can find them at this website that I put here, Parent Center Hub, or you can also contact me and I'll be more than happy to send you the contact information for your parent center. Like Advocates for Children, our role is really to provide guidance, information, options, choices, so that you can choose what you want to do next. And our focus is specifically around the issues around special education and also at-risk services. So it's a pretty broad mandate. And so we can offer information about bullying, discipline, suspensions. We can offer information about admissions to school, transfers, etc. Because like I said, our mandate is pretty broad. It's really to inform families so that you can participate more fully in your child's education. By the way, if my voice breaks, it's because I've had a terrible cold. This weather has been really horrible, and I hope everybody here is healthy. I wanted to start with Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which is one federal statute that prohibits discrimination based on disability, perceived or actual. Schools have to make reasonable accommodations, and actually any agency that receives even 1 penny of federal funding has to make reasonable accommodations. And those rights apply to anyone, to parents, for example. So reasonable is a really important standard because reasonable is different than what you'll see with special education and the IDEA, and I will talk about that just in a second, because reasonable also include costs. So a Section 504 service may be denied if it is too costly for an agency to make. So they're looking really at reasonable accommodations that can be made. What is reasonable? That changes, I think, as we become more, I guess we develop more in the world. It used to be unreasonable to have cutaways on street corners. Now these are mandated in most places, right? But examples of Section 504 plan accommodations include classroom accommodations, testing accommodations, nursing services, and physical modifications to the environment. I thought I was going to last a little longer than that. All right. Give me 1 second. Let me get my tea. All right. So next is the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, or the IDEA. Now, the IDEA is the federal law that applies to public schools. And I am so sorry. So this federal law is very complicated and very complex, but it says very simply that all children with disabilities from 0 through the age of 22 are entitled to a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment, okay? Each one of those words has meaning, and very specific and important meaning. Now, it is different from the previous law, Section 504, in that Section 504 is available nationally through any agency that receives 1 penny of federal funding. Here, this is really limited to local education agencies. So this is for public schools. And public schools are mandated to offer these services, appropriate services, not reasonable services like we saw here. Reasonable means that cost is a consideration. The IDEA does not understand of costs. It only understands need. If a student needs a service, the student should get that service, and that's really important. So appropriate means that the services provided by, 1 second. Sorry. Appropriate means that the services provided by the special education system are going to be specifically designed for the student's unique needs based on the evaluations, based on the information that is available, okay? And that the education must provide a meaningful benefit and will help the student make progress. It is not intended to be optimal services. It is intended to be a baseline. What does the student need to make progress? And what does the student require to make progress? So it's not to say, don't ask for additional services. It's to understand that when you're asking for services, you're not asking for services because you are interested in something extra. You're asking for something urgent and necessary that is required for a student to make progress. And that is an important distinction to make because it is not a luxury. It is an absolute necessity. So when you're asking for those services, please say so. Please do not use words like, my child would benefit from speech therapy or occupational therapy, when what you really mean is my child needs speech therapy or occupational therapy, okay? Because when you do that, what you're doing is diluting the service and ensuring that the student does not get this, okay? So far, so good? I'm falling apart here, but you guys are great. All right, and then in the least restrictive environment, in the least restrictive environment means that in as much as possible, a student with a disability is going to learn with students who do not have disabilities. The idea is inclusion, okay? But the least restrictive environment does not mean abandoning a student to their own devices, waiting for them to be able to make progress. It's really considering, well, how much support can we offer the student in the current environment so that they can make progress? And then how do we craft a program that is as close as possible to a general education environment, ensure that they have the supports to make progress, and keep them there. The least restrictive environment is going to be looking differently for one student to the next, right? For some students, the least restrictive environment is general education. For other students, the least restrictive environment is going to look like a small self-contained classroom. It really varies from student to student, but it's the idea that we want to include them as much as possible in a typically developing environment. Okay, now we switch gears completely just so that we can, sorry, just so that we can set the baseline today. What is bullying? So bullying is any oral, written, physical, or electronic act that substantially interferes with student learning, with their emotional and physical well-being, reasonably causes fear or safety, or is reasonably expected to cause physical or emotional harm and creates a hostile environment. It is not one act that occurs one time. Think of bullying as a pattern that occurs over a period of time. Okay. Of course, if something happens once, that's an incident that needs to be addressed. However, bullying is something that happens over a period of time, enough to create a hostile environment. It doesn't have to happen many, many different times, but I think 3 is like the number that we're looking at in New York. Now, schools have to address disability-based bullying and harassment and must act if it limits access to school programs, and this is under the IDEA. If uncorrected, it may violate the free and appropriate public education. You can use the IEP or Section 504 plan to create a plan to prevent bullying, harassment, or intimidation. And I can talk to you about that a little bit more. And that's it. Thankfully, this was my short presentation. I think I made it through. I now leave it to you, Dina, and to the next presenter. Thank you. Dina, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you, Liliana, and for your wisdom and information. Our next speaker is Susanna Landa, and we are so fortunate to have her with us tonight. Susanna is a licensed clinical social worker with over 20 years of experience in psychotherapy, mental health care, and school-based services. She spent 15 years as a school social worker, where she served on child study teams, helped develop IEPs, and trained leaders and teachers and staff on how to support students with learning and social emotional needs. She also brings the invaluable perspective of being a parent navigating the IEP process for her own son. Suzanne currently serves as a consultant to the programs team at MyFaith, where she helps design psychosocial programs that support individuals and families impacted by craniofacial differences. Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you, Dina. I'm really excited to be sitting here with everybody. And this is such an important presentation and a lot of important information. I'm also going to go ahead and share my screen. Hold on. Okay. Hopefully everyone can see that. Can we all, oh no, that's not, can everyone see that? Let me just go to my, give me 1 second. Let me go to my, make sure I can share it. Okay. Should be coming up.
It's on screen.
Yep, I'm just getting it to so the presentation mode. Okay, here we go. So I really, the PowerPoint that I'm showing you is just to keep the pace of what I'm going to say, since similar to what Liliana described, there's so much information that we could talk about tonight. So I wanted to just really, I really wanted to just narrow it down to a couple of points, and we can certainly answer questions after this. So my presentation today, I'm just going to really focus on how we can navigate the process when our kids have differences, and how we can also not only help our kids and support our kids, but how do we also support ourselves? Because it's really important. It's so overwhelming as a parent to navigate this system. So I want to make sure that I cover all of those bases. So as Dina said, I have a myriad of experiences. I'm a psychotherapist, I'm a mom, and I was a school social worker on a child study team for about 15 years. So I've sat on both sides of the table. And I have to be really honest when I say that sitting on the side of the table where I was advocating for my son has been one of the most challenging emotional experiences of my life, even though I have so much experience behind it. It's so different when it's your own child. And my child has ADHD, he's emotionally dysregulated and was a victim of horrific bullying all throughout elementary school. So when our kids are struggling, especially when they have visible differences and invisible differences, something really primal gets activated inside of us all. And I think we know that feeling if we have kids in this situation. One of the things we have to remember when we're working with our kids, when they're experiencing all of these difficulties, is that connection from us has to come before correcting the circumstance or the situation. So when our child comes home and they tell us that they've been bullied or excluded, our instincts might be to fix it immediately. We don't want our kid to feel uncomfortable. We don't want our kid to feel upset. We don't want our kid to experience all of those really difficult things every day when they're at school. But connection has to come first, because when a child feels hurt or embarrassed, their brain goes into threat mode. Their prefrontal cortex, the part that's responsible for fight, flight, or freeze response that we all have, it goes into threat mode. And when kids are in threat mode, or any of us are in that kind of threat mode, problem solving shuts down completely. And what brings the kid back to us, the way that we get our kid connected and talking, is by validation, because validation is going to open their brain to be able to go back into that problem solving mode. So when our kid comes home and they're really upset about a circumstance that happened, instead of us saying to them, "What did you do when that happened?" we might want to try saying some validating language like, "That sounds really hard," or "I'm really glad that you told me what happened." Because when we validate, it reduces the shame that a kid might feel based on a circumstance. And when kids do not feel shame and when they feel validated, it'll allow them to keep talking. They'll want to keep talking to us. And this is especially important for children with facial differences or any kind of differences, because many of those kids are already scanning their environment for signs that they don't belong. And we have to remember that belonging is a core developmental need. Resilience does not come from pretending that bullying doesn't hurt or exist. It comes from being supported through it. So when we talk about advocacy, we want to be ahead of the game, because the strongest part of advocacy happens before problems even begin. Most of the time, school advocacy starts after something already has happened or gone wrong. But one of the most effective tools we have is to get ahead of it. So how do you do that? Well, at the beginning of the school year, you might want to consider reaching out to your child's teacher to introduce your child as a whole person, not just in terms of what makes them different. You want to share their strengths, share what helps them succeed, and share what they love. Another suggestion that some families might take is, with permission from the school or from the teacher, some families choose to visit the class with their child and their classmates and share about their child's difference in simple language that kids understand, and also share what makes their kids tick. What's their favorite game show? What's their favorite games? What's their favorite movies? What do they like to do at recess? Because when differences are explained at a child appropriate level with calmness and confidence, that removes the mystery and reduces anxiety, not just for your kid, but for the kids in their class as well. And kids connect through sameness. Familiarity builds connection and it reduces stigma. It shifts children from being the kid who looks different to the kid who likes the same things as the other kids do. So when we advocate, we want to really be mindful that the best advocacy is protective and strategic. We have to understand that schools have hundreds of kids, maybe some have thousands of kids under their roof, and teachers have classrooms with way too many kids, in my opinion, but that's just the way things work nowadays. They don't see what we see. They don't see the after-school tears. They don't see us and our kids holding the emotional impact that is felt way after the school day ends. So when something happens, when our kid's upset, when they're in a situation where they're being excluded or bullied, our protective instinct activates immediately, which makes so much sense because we're their parents and we have to protect them. But advocacy works best when it's both protective and strategic. So when we walk into meetings and we're we're highly emotional and dysregulated, which makes a lot of sense. If you've ever been in a meeting where where all of these people are going to start talking about your kid, it's hard not to feel that way. But our message often will get lost in the intensity of our emotions. And it's not because we're wrong, but it's because dysregulation triggers us to be defensive. We want to remember that the goal might not be to win in the moment with what we're faced with, but to create movement and work collaboratively with the people that are there to support our kids. So the language that we use is really important. One of the things that I get asked a lot, whether it's by people who know what I do for a living, friends, people in town, clients that I have, parents, or even people that I worked with when I was on a child study team. The language that we use is really important. So as you can see on this slide, sometimes we're innately, we want to say, nothing's being done for my kid. What are you people doing? This keeps happening. We want to share language that's going to be cohesive and collaborative with the people that are supporting our kid. And, specific language is going to invite solutions, and it gives schools something to take action on. Educators will often focus on the behavior that they're seeing, but we see the emotional impact of that as parents. So when we calmly bring that emotional layer into the conversation and what's impacting our kids and how that's impacting our kids, we're providing important information to the team that's working with our children. And one of the most important things about this and the language we use is that when our kids see us advocating clearly and persistently, they learn that their needs matter and that their voice has power. So that brings me to, we want to regulate ourselves first. And that's really, really hard to do, especially when we're up countless sleepless nights worrying about what's going to happen when our kids walk into school, what's going to happen when our kids walk into that cafeteria. When we're emotionally flooded, the part of our brain, similar to what we talked about before with our kids' brains, right? The part of our brain responsible for reasoning and decision-making goes offline when we're extremely emotionally flooded. So that's not the time that we want to send an email. And when we're in a meeting and we're feeling emotionally flooded, that's also not the time where we want to sign the documents. Being regulated, it doesn't mean that we're not feeling emotionally, but it means that we want to pause before acting on that emotion. And you have every right not to sign a document in that meeting, in that moment. And I'll get to that in a minute. But even a short pause when we're emotional is going to help. So something that you can do is you can put your feet flat on the floor. You can take a slow breath in and a longer breath out, because the longer we exhale, that helps our brain come back to thinking and puts our brain back online and separates that from the emotional dysregulation that we're feeling, because regulation makes our advocacy so much more effective. So the strategic piece of it, right, that I got into a little bit a few seconds ago, we do not have to sign any documents when we are emotionally dysregulated. When you're sitting in a meeting and you have what feels like 87 people telling you all of the things that is going wrong and all of the things that is happening with your kid, it's probably not the time that you're rational. You're processing so much information, and you have the right to say, I'd like to take this home and review it before signing. I want to process all of this information first. Taking space doesn't mean that you're being difficult. It means that you're being thoughtful and strategic. If you get a phone call from the teacher, if you get a phone call from the school, if you have a side conversation when you're picking up your kid about something that happened in the moment, always follow up those verbal dialogues with an email and send summaries so that you have everything documented, because documentation creates clarity and accountability, and it gives you a sense of control in a process that can feel overwhelming. It also can come in really, really handy at times you might not even have realized that you might need something in writing. Always get everything in writing. That's always my advice to everybody. And the most important thing I'm going to end with here is our advocacy becomes our children's inner voice. The way we show up really helps our children in their future. And kids are sponges. It not necessarily is about what we say to our kids, it's how they see us acting, which really validates how they're going to be for themselves in the future. There's nothing small about watching our kids walk into a space where they may be stared at before they're spoken to. And there's nothing small about wondering what happened at recess or in the cafeteria. And it's so heartbreaking in ways we don't even expect. And when our child needs us to help them carry their difference, our child needs us to help them carry their differences with confidence. And when we validate their hurt, we build resilience in them. When we advocate calmly and persistently, we teach them that their voice matters. And when we show up again and again, we model and teach them something powerful, that they're worthy of taking up space in this world exactly as they are. Thank you all so much. I'm going to stop my share and I'm going to pass it back to Dina.
Thank you, Suzanne. That was really helpful information. And now I want to turn it over to Alyssa Avila. Alyssa is a parent whose 15-year-old son Mason was born with a cleft lip and palate. I've known Mason since he was little. Alyssa has navigated the public school system while facing challenges such as bullying, exclusion, and learning differences, which led her to become actively involved in the PTA and parent support groups. Alyssa is deeply passionate about ensuring that children with facial differences feel seen, supported, and valued, and we are grateful she is here to share her lived experience. So thank you, Alyssa.
Thank you, Dina, for creating this space and inviting me to this panel. Conversations like this really matter, and I'm honored to be here as both a parent and an advocate. So my name is Alyssa, and I am Mason's mom. Mason is 15. He's a freshman in high school. He is thoughtful, intelligent, and incredibly resilient. He was born with a cleft lip and palate, and he's undergone 11 surgeries now. His profile isn't simple either. He was also diagnosed with ADHD, dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, and a seizure disorder that we later discovered was caused by a genetic mutation. All of this affects him academically, socially, and emotionally, and these are both visible and invisible disabilities. So when Mason was younger, we started off with early intervention, which was a service that he received speech, OT, and PT since he was 9 months old. This is when I learned about IEPs. IEPs are your school's legal obligation to provide an individualized education plan. So I remember one of his service providers said, "This is the Bible, this is the contract." And she really enforced how important this document was. So I learned that early on. After early intervention services, Mason entered into kindergarten in a New York City public school. He was placed in a small classroom setting of 12 to 1-to-1. I was comfortable with that setting. I felt like that's where he would receive more individualized attention from his teachers. Before he entered kindergarten, I noticed Mason was looking in the mirror more often, checking out his scar. And so at that point, I did reach out to My Face, and we had a parent group at that time. And I said, "What do I do?" Someone in that parent group suggested some books. So we started out by reading him books about his facial difference. And we took that into the classroom. So before his first day at kindergarten, I did have a talk with his teacher, explained his condition, and I asked if there was at some point later on in the year if I could come in and read that same book to the other kids. So I was able to do that, and I'm really happy about that because that gave Mason some confidence in the classroom. And it also was a way of empowering Mason in his differences so that he was able to acknowledge it and also be able to educate others and ultimately feel pride about his difference. Elementary school went by and we later entered into middle school. At this point, Mason was transitioned into an ICT setting, which is an integrative co-teaching. It's a much larger classroom setting where there's half kids with IEPs and half kids with like a regular educational plan. This was against my better judgment. I did feel pressured by teachers. So this is another thing that I learned is teachers in these IEP meetings, they'll like to say things like they graduated out of programs. I was promised a lot of support, that Mason would have support in this classroom, and it didn't go that way. So middle school was rough for us. He was not supported. And this is the point where bullying began. So his bullying wasn't just teasing, he was also exclusion. He wasn't talked to or acknowledged by other kids. I get emotional. He sat alone at lunch for a month or more. And it triggered his seizures. And this is when we discovered that um, his seizures were triggered by his extreme fear and anxiety for school. At this point, I was livid and I did the only thing I knew or felt like I had control over, and I started to write. And so I wrote an email and I CC'd every single one of his teachers, the principal. And in New York City, we have something called Respect for All Committee. So I CC'd the Respect for All liaison. So Respect for All is an anti-bullying organization. It's created by the DOE. I did that, and that led to a meeting with the school team where we created a plan of action. So, with bullying, the DOE is not only responsible for preventing, addressing, and stopping bullying, but also restorative services because bullying does leave scars. And so, I did ask for counseling to be added to his IEP to address the emotional damage that was done. And I felt like I wanted every single adult held accountable for his experience. Um, so going into high school, we had a much better experience. I made sure that at my first parent-teacher conference, when I met with his advisor, actually it was the orientation. I met with his advisor and I explained Mason's condition, his situation, and what he had gone through in middle school. At that point, his advisor shared his personal cell phone number. So we're on a text-to-text basis, which made me feel a lot more comfortable and safe with Mason going into his high school. So yeah, so we text often. If I need an update or a check-in, I can ask his advisor, and his advisor will always get back to me, which definitely puts me at ease and made the transition into high school a much better experience. So some of the things that I did that helped early on as a parent, because I really had no idea how this worked. IEPs, the system and the process are very overwhelming. Um, it's it's legal things that sometimes are hard to understand. So I made the decision to join the PTA. And later throughout the years, I was elected as a parent rep for our district for the Chancellor's Parent Advisory Council. So I did a lot of that work. And sometimes the PTA can be very demanding. So if you're not able to join the PTA, there's also something called the SLT. SLT is a school leadership team. They hold a meeting once a month where the school policies are discussed and it's open to the public. So these are perfect opportunities, I think, for parents to come and speak with the school leadership about any ongoing issues or concerns within the school. But my parent network is where I learned how the system worked, my rights, Mason's rights, and it's where I gained access and knowledge to resources for my child. I caught on pretty quick that a lot of the parents within the PTA are parents of children with special needs. And so this is where, we would give each other advice and tips, and I built my network. Most importantly, it's where I was able to feel less alone on this journey and more supported. So I did create some tips that I think would help. So first, familiarize yourself with the IEP process. The IEP is powerful and you can include very specific supports. So for example, Mason has mild hearing loss. So even in his IEP, we state that he must sit at the front of the classroom. We've also added assistive technology to help with his dyslexia. So you can put in there little things like that, which are very important for your child's educational experience. Second, do not be afraid to bring an advocate to meetings. It's absolutely within your rights. Sometimes having someone that has knowledge in the room can help level the playing field and help you feel supported. Along those same lines, document everything. Emails, emails, emails. Written communication creates accountability and protects your child. And if concerns aren't addressed, don't stop at the first no. Follow the chain of commands. The teacher, principal, family support coordinator, superintendent, committee of special education. So escalation isn't aggression, it just means persistence. When it comes to medical needs and surgeries, we would always communicate early with teachers, planning ahead for assignments if he was going to miss school and things like that. And just as important as academic advocacy is, so is emotional advocacy. So empowering your child in their differences from early on. If we treat the condition like it's something to hide, they will too. So reminding them that it's part of their story, but it's not their whole story. And to build confidence, we did practice responses at home. We did a lot of role play to help Mason prepare and have answers that were age appropriate for any of his peers when he was having surgeries or out of school, or if they asked about his facial condition. Also surrounding your child with community. For Mason, he joins a drama therapy group, which allowed him to meet other kids who looked and felt like him. So community definitely builds identity and resilience. And finally, educating others whenever possible. Programs like My Face Wonder Project help normalize the differences and create understanding within the classroom environment. I just want to say our children deserve access, protection, belonging, and dignity. And advocacy is not about being difficult. It's about refusing to let barriers define our children's future. When the parents, educators, and medical professionals truly collaborate, they help our children survive in school, and we help our children not just survive in school, but give them a chance to thrive. And that is all I had to share today.
Okay, so thank you so much for sharing your story, your advice. It's really helpful to hear that, what you experienced with Mason. So thank you. And thank you again to all panelists for sharing your expertise and tools to help the children succeed in school. I'd like to open it up to questions and encourage you to go into the Q&A to write in your questions or concerns. And if you can't see it, I believe you go to more and then Q&A, you'll see it since the chat is unfortunately not working tonight.
We
So
have
again, and we have some questions. So thank you, Rena.
The first question is, I'd love to hear how you can put bullying into the IEP. My other question is, my daughter is in sixth grade. In fifth grade, she met all of her speech goals and they said they would no longer provide them. However, I feel since she is deaf, she does wear OSHAs. How can something as important as speech be denied?
I'm assuming that's for me.
Yeah.
Okay. Or anybody else to step in. Alyssa, that was lovely. And Suzanne, thank you for that presentation. I learned a lot from both of you. And again, I apologize if I suddenly go into coughing fits. It's been a really rough ride. Let me answer your question. So there is a section in the IEP for management. There's also a section for behavioral needs. In either one of those sections, you can include information about creating a behavioral shelter if the student is the one who is doing the bullying, and also behavioral shelter if the student is one who is being the target of the bullying. What does that look like? It looks different for every child. It could be having a safe place for the student to go, having a specific person to whom they can go and report the bullying. It can also be a training plan for the whole school. We've done this before in New York City. Of course, every different school district has their own rules, but training students so that they're aware and familiar with the condition and or the situation of the student, also teaching empathy, teaching including information as to what the student can expect the school to do, looking into behavior codes that then can be enshrined into the IEP. There's so many different things that can be done, very, very person specific. So it really depends on the student. Now, the second part of that is making sure that the school is on board, that they have the people that are trained to then address the needs that are now mandated onto the IEP. There is a national center, I'm sure you've heard about it, PACER, PACER, .org, National Center for Anti-Bullying. And they also have a lot of information that you can use to try to implement a behavioral shelter or a bullying shelter onto the IEP. So either one of those things can work. If you want more detailed information, I'm happy to share that with you later. We can go over certain things. I don't care if you're not in New York City, we can definitely do that. Then the second question is, how can services be denied? I mean, that is the quintessential question, right? I mean, the basic piece that the IDEA says is that services must be appropriate, and appropriate is those services that allow the student to make progress where progress is needed. So if you have a document, an evaluation that is up to date, or some other updated report from a service provider that spells out the need for a specific service, that should be sufficient to create the service, so long as it is written in a very strong way. So not the whole a student may benefit from, but rather a student needs X to be able to make progress. That is really what is within the context of the law. If it fails, you have also the right to go to mediation, or the right to go to an impartial hearing, or the right to go to another IEP meeting and get additional evaluations until you get to the point where things are resolved. And even when that is resolved, every school year you have a new chance to create new services. So it's, one defeat, if you want to call it that, is not a loss, a complete loss. It's just one more hiccup in a very long process.
Anybody else have anything to add before I go to the next question? Should schools have a standardized re-entry protocol for students returning after significant medical or life-altering events, so support isn't dependent on having an exceptional teacher?
You want me? I can take this one. So I was a school social worker in New Jersey, so state by state might be different, or school district might be different. I know that when kids have a situation where they're out of school, there's usually a specific amount of days where they're then granted home instruction. So they might be granted home instruction. The schools, I would say for the most part, will create a plan for the student to get what they need outside of school, dependent on if they're able to access those services, or the tutoring or whatever that might look like for that particular student. But when they come back to school, they always should have some kind of a reentry plan. The schools, as far as I know, do work very well with that. And again, advocacy, when you know that your kid is going to be out for a surgery, always giving a lot of notice, advance notice as you can, and being transparent to the point that you're comfortable doing that, so that the school can also give you what they want. And I always like to position it by, how are you going to support us? How are you going to support my child? So very direct and collaborative language to use, but schools usually will have a plan in place for that.
Thank you. For Alyssa, what book did you read to the kindergarten class?
So it was 10 years ago, and I don't remember the exact book. But I remember one book that we read to Mason was about a bear, and I think it was called These Lips. So the book that we read to the classroom, I don't remember, but I did look up some books that were that came out, and one of them that was suggested is The Day Bert Smiled. So it's about a first grader and his experience going into school with cleft. So that's one, but I can definitely put a link in the chat for a bunch of books that I just found that I think would be helpful.
And I will add that at MyFace, we have a reading list on our website that you can go to for more books to find out more.
Okay, is there a way to advocate for your child during early intervention? Specifically, we had services, but it seems there aren't enough providers in the city for speech. For example, service coordinator says they keep posting the job, but there's no providers taking up the case. Any thoughts on additional levels of advocacy or escalation for this?
I'll take that one. So this has been a significant issue in New York City. I'm sure this has been a significant issue in other places from what I hear from the regional parent centers. that there is not enough staff to offer the services that have been recommended, particularly in early intervention. And so the solution that we find is really looking outside the early intervention providers and trying to find other providers that can offer the service, and then inform the early intervention provider in New York is the Department of Health that you are going to be doing this, and then seeking reimbursement. You do have mediation and impartial hearing rights through early intervention as well. So to get reimbursed for those services, to go out looking for them yourself. It does not offer an easy solution, but it is at this point, one of the options that parents have, because like I said, there's a real gap in the number of people who can offer the services. We have also heard that some families are trying to get remote services for speech and other services from 0 to 3. We do not recommend this. Children do not learn very well from screens. They learn better in person. And so it's a way for some parents to try to get some services. If it's adequate for your child, of course, go ahead and do that, but we just don't recommend that part. I hope that's helpful.
The next question is, I have a meeting with my son's committee of special needs this Wednesday, and they have denied him SEIT, OT, speech, and PT services that he was approved for all of a sudden when he transitioned from CSPE to CSE. Any advice on how I can advocate for him with the school district to reinstate at least his speech therapy services?
So that's the transition to kindergarten IEP, and often those services look, Suzanne, you can chime in later in this one if you want, but those services often look different from what the CPSC, the Committee on Preschool Special Education, has offered. And it is typical to see a loss in services, particularly for the CET, because those services are not necessarily offered in kindergarten. However, if you believe that there is a service that is needed and was not offered on the IEP, take a look at the evaluations and see if those evaluations are current or if they're outdated, and what the recommendation for services may be. Because it just might be an oversight, or for whatever reason they reduce the services. And if they're needed at this point, you have the right to mediation, you have the right to an impartial hearing. You can request additional evaluations if you feel that those evaluations were incorrect or inadequate or incomplete or old, and then to have another IEP meeting before the start of the new year. Okay.
Suzanne, anything to add? Okay. A student has been removed from school and sent to a partial, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, hospitalization program. Oh, partial hospitalization program due to behaviors. Now it's time to meet for reentry planning meeting. What services, evaluations, plans are usually expected to support a child after having this experience?
I can jump in on this one first. So a partial hospitalization program, I guess without knowing if the child does not have an IEP already, then I'm imagining that they're probably going to ask for evaluations from the partial hospital program with whoever is providing the services for them to be able to share those with the school. The school might do evaluations if they haven't done them before, depending on the length of time or the last time that the evaluations were initiated. So if they had evaluations that are within a current time frame, they might not have to redo the evaluations, but based on the information they receive from the partial hospitalization, they might choose to reevaluate the child. I'm imagining it's more for their psychosocial needs and reentry and how that's going to look when they come back to school, if that makes sense.
This isn't so much a question, but more of a comment, and maybe someone can shed light on this. The home instruction in New York City is inconsistent. My son had it for 3 months in 2019, and it was not very effective. The teacher did not submit a report to the regular school teacher either. I don't know if there's any advice on that.
I can go for that if you want. So home instruction is supposed to be a temporary service, of course, for when students are unable to attend school because of a medical or emotional need. And what often happens is that the home instructor is supposed to coordinate with the home school, the school where the student was attending before going into home instruction, and get the lesson plans and get the information and the homework, and the direction from them. That does not always happen if the school is not actively communicating with home instruction. Also, home instruction is not a full-time program. It's about, I think it's 2 hours for high school students per day, so about 10 hours per week and 5 hours per week for elementary school students in New York City. It could be different in other places, of course. So it's already a little bit less than it's supposed to be, actually quite a bit less than what you're supposed to receive. So the idea is that the student will maintain some sense of what's happening in school, but I don't know that it is an adequate substitute for being in school altogether. You can request additional home instruction on the argument that they're not getting enough instruction, and you can also receive all the related services, speech therapy, occupational therapy, etc., at home as you're supposed to, okay? Remote instruction is something else that you can request. Now, after the pandemic, this has become more typical. So a hybrid program. And so when someone is experiencing a need for home instruction so that they can maintain the support that they need, but it is a lot of work on the part of the parent to make sure that all the coordination is happening. But it is possible.
The next question is, my son with a unilateral cleft lip and palate has found by the IEP evaluations to be able to access the school curriculum, and as such, the CSE has denied him speech therapy. However, his NYU cleft team speech therapist did an evaluation that his speech is not intelligible and is affecting his speech, which shows in his behavior at home. But because at school he behaves well and he is doing well academically, the school district does not take into consideration the cleft team recommendations, and has denied him speech therapy. Any advice?
I mean, I that's bonkers to me. Those are two different needs altogether. So performing well in school and having um intelligible speech. So I just want to know if this is a New York City school, because um, there are two things you can do. You can escalate it to the district level to see if a different evaluation may be needed, etc. It's really a very limited toolkit. Evaluations are very important. They really do set the foundation for everything special education, but also it's really inconsistent what they're saying. It makes no sense. Another thing would be to go to mediation or go to an impartial hearing. When I say mediation, I like mediation particularly for things like this, because it's informal. You can go to the school and have somebody who has decision-making power in the room with you rather than just the school team. And they can talk through the issues with someone who is able to solve arguments. They're not going to be directing anything. You're going to be in control of what you agreed to do or not agreed to do. And it's a very collaborative experience. And, going to an impartial hearing is a little bit more, difficult because you're basically going to trial, right? With someone who acts as a judge, and it's a bit more oppositional. So either one is available to you. But this situation just sounds kind of insane. If you're in New York City, please get in touch with us. I'm happy to walk you through the process.
Can I add something to that too? And it's something that was hard as sitting as a child study team member, because when their evaluations are done, I'm not going to say most of the time, there has to be academic impact. And it doesn't mean that your child has a need for speech or OT or PT, and it doesn't mean that that's not impacting them in school. But if there's no demonstration of academic impact, they'll be less likely to, on the evaluation level or in the initial level of a meeting, they'll be less likely to grant services if there's not proven academic impact. It doesn't mean that it can't happen, because that's exactly what mediation is for. That's exactly what Liliana is talking about. That's sometimes what happens on the school level, and it's infuriating even sitting on a child study team, because that's really impacting the kid, even if they're behaving well or even if they're demonstrating their academic knowledge, because eventually it's not going to. And if they're getting it on the outside, they need to get it on the inside too. And if there's an evaluation by a really wonderful resource like NYU, clearly there needs to be something done in school.
Yeah, I'm gonna push back on the school logic, because from the perspective of an advocate, if you are in a wheelchair, it doesn't have any real academic impact, but you still need accessible schools and access to services. So use that. If you're in need of speech therapy and you're capturing all the information and answering all of those questions, you're still in need of those services. So again, mediation and partial hearing, new evaluations that are more. I look at evaluations and I say evaluations often because the language used in evaluations is really important, that this is something that is necessary and without which the student cannot make progress in this area. Okay.
I don't know what time we have left. Is there time for any more questions?
I think we can take one more question.
Okay, I'm going to look at the questions that came in prior to the call. How can I guarantee that a public school will provide the staff needed to support my son? I know the IEP protects him, but working in the school system, I know maximum support a student can get for speech in an hour a week, and there's a staff shortage. Can I ask a school to connect me with a speech therapist before selecting the school I want my son to attend, or should I do school visits?
Liliana, you probably can handle because it sounds like it's a school, it's a district where you can choose your school.
So that's a really hard one because anything that's listed on the IEP has to be provided, period. And the IEP has to be created based on the student's need, not what's available, not what they think they can handle, not if they ever heard of the service. It has to include everything that a child needs, and most of that is based on the evaluations, right? So the first problem is creating an IEP that is solid and reflects the student's full range of needs, all right? And then the second piece is they have to figure it out. So if the school tells you they don't have enough staff, then they have to give you some sort of voucher or way for you to be able to hire your own service provider, be it a speech therapy, occupational therapist, counselor, whatever it is that you're in need. It's inconvenient, but they have to give you the way to do it. The second thing is that if they have staff that's available, they should not reduce the services to best implement so that everybody can get a little bit. No, your child is supposed to get everything on their IEP. And again, the way to push schools to do this is through due process, either by first ensuring that you have a solid IEP and then going through the process of mediation or an impartial hearing. Because although the IEP is a mandate and everything written in it has to be offered, if it's not being offered, then you can go to mediation and just say, here, this is something that needs to be offered, or to an impartial hearing and have a judge, depending on the system that you have in your state, say this needs to be offered. And so that becomes then a more difficult situation for the school to avoid. Unfortunately, that is, you can also do a systems complaint, so a statewide complaint saying that students are not getting the services that they need. And that might also ensure that more students get those services, but on an individual basis, that's really the step up the chain that you need to follow.
Can I just
Thank-
add
Yes,
something in there?
absolutely.
So about the speech therapist part, something that we did was when we had our parent teacher conference, I met with his speech therapist, but Mason also had a speech therapist through his clef team who was more experienced with his condition. And so I asked if they would work together, and they did. And that definitely helped so much. They would do check-ins, and they kind of planned out his therapy and coordinated together. So I think that's another way you can, help the situation if you don't feel confident in that speech therapist that the school provides.
Thank you. I just want to take a moment to thank you, Alyssa, Suzanne, and Liliana, for sharing your expertise, your wisdom, your advice. I'm pretty certain we've helped some parents and caregivers today, so I thank you. I know we just touched the surface on a lot of things, so I'm sure we'll be talking more about this in the months to come, but I thank you all for attending today. We have a upcoming our next panel, which will be supporting the whole child, advocating for and with your child in medical spaces. Thursday, March 12th from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time. It will be moderated by Irina Rosen, and will feature 3 licensed psychologists and social workers, all with lived experiences. So be on the lookout for further details. And to learn more about our support and resources, you can visit myface.org. And we are here to support you and your family on this journey. And as always, I say, there's power in the shared story and knowing you're not alone. So please know you are not alone. And we have a brief survey that we'll put in the Q&A, but will also be emailed to you afterwards for you to fill out so that we can better serve your needs and offer the support that you are looking for. So thank you again to our guests tonight and for all of you attending. Thank you. And I will add that it's in the Q&A, not in the chat information. But we will also make sure that you get the survey and everything
The
afterwards.
question came in, will there be a copy of this? And also, will the slides be shared?
Yes, we will have a copy of this recording because there were people also that were not able to join. We will also figure out if we will definitely be sharing some resources that you can also use as well as the recording. So yes, for sure. So thank you everybody for joining us tonight.